Hello and welcome to a special edition of the show. I'm François Picard, an edition we're calling The World in 2020. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. With us, Reem Mumtaz, Paris correspondent for Politico.
Thank you for having me.
Are you looking forward to 2020?
Yes, I think 2020 is going to be better than 2019 because what other choice do we have, right?
Okay. Will the streets be paved with gold? Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report, will tell us.
There'll be certainly more gold on the ground than there was in 2019, except in Britain, where I think
We'll get to that.
dilemmas.
We'll get to that later. Will the gold be in Switzerland? Richard Verly, Paris correspondent for Swiss daily newspaper Le Temps.
Thank you for being on board. And we have, as Reem say, we have no other choice than to look forward.
Okay. France24.com senior editor Lila Jacinto is with us as well.
Whip cracking next year? Sure.
Okay. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. It's that time. Every 4 years, the whole planet waits on the small rural U.S. states of Iowa and New Hampshire to tell us who's the favorite to be the next leader of the most powerful nation on earth. What we can already predict on that score is that, well, this election will be different.
This is the lightest, weakest impeachment.
It's a witch hunt. It's a sham. It's a hoax. Nothing was done wrong. Zero was done wrong.
It's a joke. Impeachment for that?
Reem Mumtaz, Donald Trump's still in negative territory when it comes to his popularity, but his numbers have risen.
Well, is he in negative territory in the states that matter and will decide the election? I'm not so sure. So far as I know, the electoral arithmetic is still in to his advantage when it comes to the general election. It's interesting, though. He has decided he seems to be thinking about not taking part in the debates during the election, which I think would be a first, and I'm not sure how people would react to that. But we are seeing that the people who support Trump are hardliners and will continue supporting him. It's going to depend a lot on who the Democratic candidate is going to be. And I'm sorry to use that word, the E word, how electable that candidate is in the states that really decided the 2017 election.
How much will the impeachment matter?
Not much at all.
Not much at all?
No, not much at all. Because actually, I don't know if you saw this poll. It was a very interesting poll that showed that opinion toward impeachment hasn't changed much. Those who support impeachment...
Because what's different this time is that Senate trial is going to bump into the period when there's the first caucus in Iowa, though.
Yeah, but so far, what we've seen from this impeachment proceeding is that it hasn't really moved the needle on, it hasn't convinced those who weren't convinced that impeachment should happen. It hasn't really convinced them to support impeachment. And at the end of the day, in the Senate, the Republicans are not showing any sign of wanting to switch sides and actually impeach him. So we're still really along partisan lines. It's not going beyond the traditional partisan lines so far.
All right, the script is the president won't be removed by the Senate, as Reem says, but with a sturdy Republican majority there, and you need 2/3 to remove a president. Nonetheless, will it move the needle?
I agree with Reem. And that's actually the crushing thing about these U.S. Election years. You wait right until the summer for the Democratic candidate, the actual candidate, to emerge. You get trapped in so much circus, which is great fun for if you are in U.S. media and you're covering U.S. politics. But, the substance of the issues does not come until much later, a bit like the Brexit debate. We're just talking about the glitz and the fun. And, there's never enough time to discuss this. And there's something so inevitable. Florida, we're going to watch that circus. The Senate will respond exactly as you expect the Senate to respond on the impeachment. And in fact, there will be senators from and congressmen from sections that will be actually watching how they will vote on impeachment, because some of these congressmen and women come from areas that have Republican support, right, even though they're Democrats.
Let's talk about the facts here. The president's biggest bogeyman, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, but also California Congressman Adam Schiff. Let's listen to the chair of the House Intelligence Committee reacting to the notes of that July phone call between Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart, in which Trump asks Volodymyr Zelensky for political dirt on Joe Biden, notes which the White House described as a transcript.
Notes of the call reflect a conversation far more damning than I or many others had imagined. It is shocking at another level that the White House would release these notes and felt that somehow this would help the president's case or cause. Because what those notes reflect is a classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader.
Classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader. Richard Verly, we're talking about Ukraine, which has a Russian-backed insurgency on its eastern border.
That's a very strong accusation. What Donald Trump is going to do throughout 2020 is victimizing himself, presenting himself as a victim of the elite, the one who don't accept his policies and so on. Plus, he has an advantage that we did not mention, the fact that the son of Joe Biden himself was not that clear about his dealing in Ukraine. And certainly, Trump is going to push that button. Now, maybe one thing, one uncertainty is with Trump, you never know. He makes very good moves, but he can also make very bad moves. And you never know with one tweet, one declaration he may do during the coming month, then maybe some shift in the opinion or maybe some shift in the Senate among the Republicans can occur. I doubt it, but with Trump, there is always a risk, and it's not sure the risk is going to play necessarily in his favor.
I think the other thing allied to the impeachment is the case of Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor.
I was going to say,
this is being is under criminal investigation.
Because this is a three-ring circus, right?
Yeah.
You have, on the one hand, the electoral timing that Rim was talking about. There's the legislative timing, what with the whole the Senate trial that's coming up, and then there's the judiciary.
Yeah, and that's tremendously important because, as we've seen, the New York courts are trying to get Trump's tax records. They're trying to unravel his business empire and work out which bits have benefited from his presidency and the ethics of those links and ties. And then there's another guy in the mix called John Bolton, his former national security advisor, who left under high dudgeon after Trump claimed to have sacked him. And he, too, has a lot of information about this, was very unhappy with the Ukraine arrangement or reputed arrangement. So I would say things can go wrong quite rapidly. It's by no means a shoo-in for Trump, even if all the other things you say are going to happen in 2020 happen. I think that's. I think there are real risks. One, I mean, if you just look at the Erdogan example last year, when Erdogan sent the troops into Syria after the call with Trump, automatically there was a bipartisan opposition against Trump kicked in, and I think there'll be a real risk.
But that wasn't a threat to Trump's presidency.
No.
Whereas this is.
I mean, the Republicans would have to really examine what they're up to if at any stage now they decide to support impeachment in the Senate, because it was like completely discombobulating their election campaign. They'd have to find a candidate. It's pretty clear that Mike Pence, whatever virtues he may have, he's keeping them well hidden, is not a vote pleaser, is not a national leader. So the Republicans would very quickly have to find a different sort of leader, and it could be a really fractured contest. I mean, I think they're more or less locked into a Trump supporting a second Trump candidacy this year. So I don't see any likelihood of the Republicans shattering in the Senate. But what I do think is that Trump's public persona and reputation could really be affected by some of the LinkedIn scandals, if you like.
But can it? I mean, the strength of Trump is that he has found a way to tap into a narrative that is simple and intelligible for those in the U.S. who don't unlike us, who don't follow foreign policy all the time.
Because that gives him 35, 36% of the
foreign
election.
policy is not really an issue in U.S. elections. And even when he goes, he's quite smart when it comes to how he's targeting his audience. When he goes to NATO and he says, "I am getting everyone else to pay more because I don't want us Americans to pay more," that actually appeals across the board. It doesn't just appeal.
George Bush
sure.
and Barack Obama.
But he has been the person who has been able to express it in the simplest, most direct terms. It shocks people who aren't used to presidents speaking this way, but it's been effective with the people he is targeting. He's not talking to you and me when he's talking about that. And even on the issue with Ukraine, I mean, we obviously know that this is not at all how you act when you're the president of America. But seen from the perspective of perhaps people who aren't, part of, journalists or analysts, for them, it's like, what did he do that was so wrong? He was just making sure that America doesn't give without anything in return.
Richard Verdi?
Well, with Trump, it's always the question of the perception. How do people perceive him? And at the moment, it's true that he's in his own constituency. People who support him still believe that he defends them. He defends a strong American economy, he defends America's border, he defends America's interest in the world. And that's what is more important for them. Now, the question is, can they move a bit if it is proven on the judicial side that Trump or some of his cronies, Giuliani and so on, have acted wrongly? And to me, that's the main question of 2020, because justice is still something in the US. I hope so. And if there is a proof of a wrongdoing, how will people react?
The other factor's got to be the economy. I mean, right now, jobs are up and the growth is still strong. If that falters by mid-year, again, I think that's going to really help the Democrats. And that's the other factor. So I think in a way, it's almost outside of the Capitol building. It's down to the economy and you do judicial proceedings to throw some obstacles.
The fact is that he has found one ally with Chinese President Xi Jinping with this armistice in the trade war. They have found some kind of solution. So in a way, he may be in position to deliver more on the economic front in the month to come.
Richard Verdi talking about how the U.S. still has that system which has those locked-in checks and balances between the different branches of government. You were talking earlier about the judicial timetable in 2020.
Yeah.
What's the U.S. Supreme Court now with judges in the majority have been appointed by Republican presidents going to do about those tax returns?
Yeah, I mean that's going to be a critical, absolutely critical issue, and it's really going to test the separation of powers. Yeah, and Justice
will it
Roberts.
test America's standing as a democracy?
I think it will. Yeah, I think it will because you've moved to this point in time where the Supreme Court has this hyper partisanship now, and whatever it rules, I mean, no one's going to come out and accuse the individual justices of bias. But I think if you look at the composition of the court, people are going to say, well, they voted this way. If they vote not to have the returns released, I think the assumption will be, well, it's payback time for Mr. Trump.
I think that the Trump era definitely challenged sort of democracy in the U.S., but after 4 years of Trump being president, we've seen that the democratic institutions in America are extremely resilient. People are very engaged. Civil society is very engaged. The courts are playing their role. It's not just the Supreme Court. You have the state level courts that have been playing a role that is very important. We saw it with the issue of detaining sort of minor migrants. Actually, society has been quite resilient. So I wouldn't go as far as saying that this is testing America's democratic standing in the world. I think that's an exaggeration.
Right, U.S. institutions resilient. So is Donald Trump, because you remember in 2016, people said, "Oh, he's too old. He's not a politician. He'll never last 4 years."
Well, that's the danger of also not taking seriously what people say. in certain parts of the country, and B, underestimating people who don't look like us or sound like us. And I think that should be one of the big lessons we all take from this period.
All right, you heard Richard Verly saying perhaps Joe Biden does have a problem. When you look at that Democratic field, who's looking good right now? Renee?
Well, the Democratic field, the issue is right now there isn't one candidate that seems to be kind of a home run. Each one of the candidates has issues. Joe Biden has issues we are all aware of. We saw Kamala Harris, who started really strong and then just fizzled and is now out. Elizabeth Warren is going through a really rough time right now after doing a good showing. Pete Buttigieg, who seems to be very promising, has a real issue appealing to the African American vote, and a Democrat cannot be elected without the African American vote.
They say it's the era of insurgents. Donald Trump proved it. In his own way, Emmanuel Macron is an insurgent here in France. You need to disrupt the system. You need to... for the Democratic Party, is it a better bet going, Lila Jacinto, towards someone who is more radical, more to the left, or more of a centrist?
Well, I think the U.S. is essentially still a pretty conservative country. And with the Democratic candidate, you have to appeal to the middle ground voters.
Because they say there's no middle ground voters this time. You're either for Trump or against him.
That's true, but you've got to you still, the economy is still doing well, and Trump had a certain Teflon quality that the people who stick with Trump, nothing stuck to him. With candidates like Bernie Sanders, and well, let's see. I mean, nobody could be as bad a candidate as Hillary Clinton was, and so so it would be, from my point of view, it would be good to have someone from the outside who's not seen as part of the Democratic machine. But these elections are so expensive. They come up with this. They have to amass huge amounts of campaign money. So,
Patrick, a left winger or a moderate?
Well, I think if you've got the electoral college system, as you pointed out, you need those 5 critical states that actually got Trump over the line last time, but saw him lose the popular vote by 2 million plus. I think, that speaks for having a centrist like Biden, to be honest.
Richard Verly?
Probably the difficulty with Biden is that he is a very good opponent for Trump, in the sense that Trump will attack him very strongly, and I'm not sure Biden will find the possible answers and reply to Trump. So I would say he is probably the candidate that Trump wants to have.
All right, food for thought. When we come back, we're going to look at the future, which is unwritten now for the UK in 2020. What we do know is January 31st, it's leaving the European Union. You're watching The World in 2020. Welcome back to a show we're calling The World in 2020. I'm François Picard. The World This Week throughout the year in partnership with The Daily Beast. Rim Momtaz, Paris correspondent for Politico.eu and Politico.com. Just Politico, right?
Just Politico,
Just
yeah.
Politico, okay. Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report.
Greetings.
What will don the cover of the first issue of 2020?
Well, we've hedged our bets. We've got a flotilla of African leaders, Buhari, Ramaphosa, Hamdok, El Sisi. So lots of different African leaders. And we've got, again, Vladimir Putin and Erdogan, who are showing a great interest in Africa. And one Mr. Boris Johnson, who I believe has won an election somewhere recently.
We'll talk about that in a second. Richard Verly, Paris correspondent for Le Temps, the Swiss daily newspaper. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Lila Jacinto of France24.com fame. The future, we were saying in part one, may be unwritten across the Atlantic. Different story across the channel. On the morning after the Tories' biggest win since 1987 and Labour's worst show since 1935.
With this mandate and this majority, we will at last be able to do what? You've been paying attention. Because this election means that getting Brexit done is now the irrefutable, irresistible, unarguable decision of the British people. And with this election, I think we've put an end to all those miserable threats of a second referendum. And I say respectfully to our stentorian friend in the blue 12-star hat. That's it. Time to put a sock in the megaphone and give everybody some peace.
He's talking about that lone protester, Patrick Smith, who's always outside the Downing Street and the Houses of Commons. That's bad Boris, right? Later that same day, we heard good Boris. Instead of the people's government, he was talking about being a one-nation conservative.
That's right. And winging straight up to Sedgefield, Tony Blair's old constituency in northeast England, to congratulate the voters for making the right choice. Yeah, he's going on with his charm offensive.
So which Boris will it be? Will it be that one who's a little bit putting the knife in? Or will it be, look, the election's over, let's talk about the national health?
Is he going to get conciliatory? No, I don't think he is. I think he's got to appeal to the ultra Brexiteers, which is, we're going to get this deal done within a year, because one of the big criticisms of the Get Brexit Done slogan was it was totally empty. Brexit is not going to get done in a year or even 2 years. It's going to drag on, and we're going to have this national debate about our trade relationships, firstly with Europe and then with the US. And already you're seeing some chinks in the wall. You know, he said before, oh, well, there's absolutely no question of the American drugs companies coming in, dictating terms to the National Health Service and so on, increasing privatization of National Health Service. They're already rolling back on that within days of the election victory. So I think you're going to see the true Boris, which is a right-wing conservative prime minister who's riding this crest of nationalism. And I think he's going to hit some really big trouble in trying to deliver some economic goods after having made these promises. Is there really enough money in the Treasury to fulfill the sort of promises he's made to the working class voters in the North and the Midlands?
All right, and there's this second cliff edge, Richard Verly, which he has set up, because he has said emphatically there has to be a trade deal by the end of 2020 or else.
True. I'm afraid that in 2020, as far as the European Union is concerned, we're going to discover nasty Boris Johnson. Until now, he was either the buffoon or the populist, but he's going to become nasty on the trade issue. It's not going to be easy for the EU to negotiate that trade deal. And to tell the truth, the EU needs a trade deal as much as the UK. We've been told in 2019 with a large part of truth that the UK was in a weaker position because it was the Brexit without an agreement would have been very difficult to hold for the British economy. Now it's a bit different, and with the election in his favor, Boris Johnson can now come forward more fiercely. And I'm afraid that the unity within the 27 might be a bit shaky during the coming month.
Will be shaky how?
Shaky because at some point, the different countries will take the calculator and start to see what are the benefits of having a good trade relation with the UK or not. And when you start to calculate, then the sense of disunity may appear, though Michel Barnier, the negotiators, still think he will be able to hold the 27. But I'm a bit afraid, again, watch Nasty Boris.
Nasty Boris. There was that slogan we saw at the rostrum when we heard that clip from him earlier, the people's government. What do you make of that, Leila Jacinta?
Well, I mean, Boris is also going to have to talk about the very fundamental nature of the country, which is Scotland and Ireland. I mean, this is United Kingdom, and the Scottish Nationalist Party had an incredible victory, and has once again started talking about having a referendum. And in Northern Ireland, there is, of course, there's the renewed fear of violence breaking out. So he's on the domestic front. He's got very fundamental issues, and I'm not sure that he's going to really be the unifier that he talked about. So, nasty Boris, I would say yes.
Nasty Boris, Mumtaz?
Yeah, he's going to be pragmatic, Boris, nasty Boris. He's going to defend the interests he believes are British interests. And I actually agree that it's going to be a very difficult negotiation in terms of what they call the future relationship with the EU. It's something that is to be expected, but it is true that he at least will sort of get Brexit. When he says get Brexit done, it means
the divorce deal by
the
January
divorce
1st.
is going to happen, and then we just have to figure out the terms. It's a big word. This is, I think, now we're actually getting into the heart of the matter. To just think about that, Brexit took 3 years to negotiate to get to a withdrawal agreement that he could sell back home. I don't know how long this agreement on the future relationship and the trade agreement is going to take.
How does it feel? The divorce deal is actually happening, Patrick.
Yeah.
How does it feel to you as a subject of our gracious host?
It feels like the end of an era for certain. I mean, whatever the relationship is going to be, it's going to be different with Europe, and I'd say a little more troubled, as everyone else has said. I think that the fact that he's actually written it into legislation, or proposes to write it into legislation, that he has to get the trade deal done with Europe by the 31st of December 2020 is remarkable. He's actually made himself a hostage to that fortune, setting himself that deadline. But it's part of saying, well, this is really simple, and that has been the Brexiters' slogan all along. It's just a matter of leaving the European Union. We're just going to, go off into the sunset with our own brave new global Britain. And fine, if the Europeans don't want to agree with this, we'll just walk out, and we won't pay our dues, and we'll walk out on World Trade Organization terms. No problem.
All right. Lila Jacinto was mentioning the strains on the United Kingdom as a whole as a result of leaving the EU. It's also a nation which basically has what some have described as a 2.5-party system. So which way now for a Labour Party reduced to its smallest numbers of seats in the Commons, again, since 1935? Or rather, first question, when is the leader stepping down?
I was elected to lead the party, and I think the responsible thing to do is not to walk away from the whole thing, and I won't do that. I will stay here until there has been somebody elected to succeed me, and then I will step down at that point.
First session of Parliament, new majority, and there's still Jeremy Corbyn on leading the opposition benches. Your thoughts on that, Richard?
We were talking earlier about Trump versus Biden. And I was saying that Biden was, in a way, the ideal candidate for Trump. Well, definitely Corbyn was the perfect candidate for Johnson. Because Corbyn was not in position to appeal to the centrist electorate, the one who were eventually willing to vote for Labour because they were discouraged by his old-fashioned policy, by the accusation of anti-Semitism and so on. And plus, the buzz was generally negative about Corbyn.
It was negative about both.
I'm not so sure it was negative about Boris, because Boris was seen as someone who could make the difference, while Corbyn was never seen as someone who could make the difference.
Well, he had a hugely ambitious program. I mean, you can't fault Corbyn for ambition. It's just that no one really understood it or could justify it and do the maths and make it add up. I mean, he had lots of policies. I think the beauty, political beauty of Boris's campaign was it only had one element, which is, I'm going to come in and I'm going to get you guys out of the European Union because you voted for that by 2% back in back in 2016. And it was simplicity, and that's what won the day.
Which Corbyn spectacularly lacked. I mean, he failed to address the one issue that was the most important for this election. He wavered. He had no position on Brexit. And
so which way now for the Labour Party? Does the Labour Party continue to tack left, or like Richard says, do they?
I think there's a battle for the soul of the party right now. There is a strong centrist candidate in the form of Keir Starmer, who was the Brexit secretary, didn't and wasn't really allowed to play a big role in Labour's election campaign. Or there's a group of very strong people like Rebecca Long-Bailey and so on the Corbynite left, and they're going to be fighting it out for the party. So I think it's really up in the air. I mean, it's very finely balanced. I
when
guess
does
the
he leave?
Corbynites have got the numbers.
When does he leave?
They say there'll be a new leader in place with by the first quarter, the end of the first quarter of the new of 2020. Could be even sooner. I think he'll want to get out because it must be really uncomfortable. Everyone's rounding on him, saying, you're the guy who's delivered the worst result for for 90 years almost. I think he'll want to leave, and he'll take a lot of his cohorts with him.
I mean, and apart from domestic politics, 2020 will be the year that the UK will once again be completely absent from the international stage. And especially in countries that are, former British post-colonial countries, we will have very little statements, especially for countries where London has traditionally responded. This as, South Asia and the former British colonies are having, steady onslaughts onto their secular democracy. With Britain now starting to make individual trade agreements, we're going to hear next to nothing about human rights commitments from London.
All right, the void that Britain will be leaving will be certainly felt in Brussels after January the 31st. A new commission, by the way, there has just taken its seat, led by Germany's Ursula von der Leyen, an Angela Merkel protege. On her watch, the European Union will shrink for the first time since its inception, and the balance of power will shift. Montas, which way will it shift, that balance of power?
It's going to shift toward France and Emmanuel Macron because he wants that leadership position, and he has been acting for it when, Germany is currently experiencing a real void in leadership in the sense of Merkel is on her way out, her replacement is not exactly clear, and Emmanuel Macron wants that position, so he's going for it. Whether he's able to pull it off, whether he finally learns how to build the coalitions that are needed on the European level is going to be a big question mark.
When you covered the G7 summit in Biarritz back in August, did you have the sense then that this was a candidate to King of Europe?
Yes. Not only then, but then when I actually went with him to China recently, it was very interesting because he, unlike Merkel, made the choice of taking with him a German minister. He took with him German business interests, and there was this unreal scene. At one point, the incoming European Trade Commissioner, Phil Hogan, who was signing a deal with his Chinese counterpart. And there was Xi Jinping, who was standing behind, looking at his minister with the Chinese flag behind him. And there was Emmanuel Macron with the European flag behind him, no French flag, looking on to his commissioner. It was really quite a stark scene to see, and he definitely wants that position.
Of course, it's not over yet. In 2020, we're going to see a Europe-China summit, and that's going to be taking place in Germany, Richard Verly.
True. Well, coming back to Macron, certainly he will step forward again in Europe. He is at the moment probably the most powerful leader in Europe, the one who is carrying new thoughts and ideas for reform. But he will bump into two obstacles. The first obstacle is you never know how von der Leyen will react, because it's not in her advantage to be seen as Macron puppets. So she may be tempted to show her independence toward France.
She already has on NATO and on
defense. Correct.
And,
and the second obstacle is the unity within the 27. I'm coming back to that after talking about Brexit. Because once again, Macron has the microphone open. He can talk loud. He can bring in willingness for reform, but who's going to follow? Who will catch Macron ideas? At the moment, I don't see anyone in Europe really ready to move in and to stand in for Emmanuel Macron.
De Jacinto?
I agree.
Well, on climate change, for example, it was very interesting because last year Macron kind of took the lead on climate change. He started with a paper that started off with 6 countries that were, and now we're at a point where it's about 26 countries. We saw it at the last European Council meeting that support it. Poland is the only holdout. So Macron seems to be now taking a new method, which is, okay, I can't start with the 27 on board. I'm going to start with a few people who are with me, and then we're going to try to get more and more people, more and more countries to rally. So far, it's worked on some issues it can't work. On some of the very structural issues, there are issues when it comes to, for example, the Eurozone budget, on which he is really at loggerheads with Germany. Germany is not really giving him much to go on.
Because he wants there to be a common budget for Eurozone nations.
Yes.
And already we see a two-speed Europe when it comes to the fact that there are those who are inside the Eurozone and those who are not.
Exactly. And so that is, I think, going to be another one of these essential big issues. And, you know, how the Commission sort of manages that and maneuvers in that land is going to be very interesting to watch.
Of course, how much power Emmanuel Macron has or how much weight he has within Europe depends, as we were saying, on Germany. Angela Merkel's long goodbye continues, and for the first time in a long while, there's talk of France's economy outpacing that of Germany's. East of the Rhine, they're experiencing their worst manufacturing downturn in a decade. In fact, it's already true, with Germany barely avoiding a recession in the last quarter with 0.1% growth, as you can see on that chart. And there's a deeper fundamental problem, Patrick Smith, which is Germany's model is of an export-driven economy at a time when there's not as much demand for what they're peddling.
Exactly. The global slowdown is not good news for them. The U.S. The fallout from the U.S.-China trade wars is not good news for Germany. Also, I think there's been a fracturing of Germany's relationship with the U.S. And it's a very personal thing between Angela Merkel and Donald Trump. When she stood up immediately after Trump was elected to say, at the end of the day, we are going to be friends with an America that upholds the traditional American values, which was a sideswipe against what Trump appears to represent. And he's come back saying, you know, you're running too high a current account surplus. You don't give enough, you don't spend enough on defense. You're not pushing your weight on NATO, and your Russia policies all over the place. So I think there's a sort of a bad relationship there, which isn't good for Germany. I think the only way forward for Germany is it's got to tack to France. I mean, you've got to have those two powers are the heart and soul of the European Union. They've got to find a way to work together. And the sort of contretemps with the expansion of the EU to include the Balkan states and so on. I mean, I think that's going to create problems.
And could Angela Merkel be out of a job sooner than we think, Richard Verly? We see there's been a big change of leadership inside her coalition partners from the SPD. There are big divisions within the Conservatives over whether they take a moderate or a more nationalist tack. Is Germany set for the kind of political gridlock we've seen in recent years in places like Spain?
Definitely, there is a sense of disunity, division within the government, but at the moment, I don't believe any of the partners in the growth coalition would take profit from an early departure of Angela Merkel. Things are not yet settled. Everybody is watching the Conservative, the Social Democrat. They are watching their back. They don't really know what can they do. So I would suspect that 2020 would be again a year of pause, politically speaking, for Germany. And that is the problem. What Germany is paying today is the price of 10 years of political defense. They have played in defense. Merkel has always played in defense. And now you have leaders who are all on the offensive, be Trump, be Johnson, be Macron. So Germany now has really to react. It cannot remain on the defensive like that. The problem is that they have got used to that type of politic and they don't really know how to readjust.
They don't know how to readjust?
Well, it's going to be, I don't know, so far it's been interesting to see how they've been reacting. We haven't really seen a great agility or reaction in the way that is needed at that level. So it really is a very open question in 2020.
All right. It's time for our panel's pick, which book to read or movie to watch to best arm oneself for 2020 during this holiday period. Let's begin with you, Rim Mumtaz.
So I'm cheating because I have two things. There's one book it's a graphic novel called Politique by Mazen Kirbaj, and it talks actually about all the leaderless protesters, but in particular, it really gives a good sense of what the Lebanese are up against. It's in French, and then of course the best movie I saw in 2019 that had me just in awe in my seat, which is Parasite. It won the Palme d'Or in Cannes, and it is first of all a feast to the eyes. The director of photography is just stupendously
Casting's amazing.
Sort of talented, but also the storyline, it goes to the heart of, again, what people are asking for, which is dignity, social justice, inequality. It deals with all of that, but in a way that is so subtle, that is so...
macabre.
Yes, macabre, but also compelling and poignant.
Yeah, best grossing foreign film in the United States this year.
It was unbelievable.
Richard Verly?
Well, as far as the book is concerned, I would vote for The Road to Somewhere in English, which is the title of the book from David Goodhart. It has been translated in French under Les Deux Clans. It tells how society is now being divided into those who can go anywhere, work from anywhere, and those who choose or have to remain somewhere. I think that's very telling, and it explains a lot Trump, Johnson, and other political stories we've been speaking about. And per the movie, I would vote for Les Misérables, the French movie on, Montfermeil, and it tells about the suburb revolt of the youth in these difficult areas of France where the police is just unable to grasp the reality in between all the traffic, drug trafficking, and so on, but also the move of the Islamists in those areas. Very telling, and I must say, a very tense movie, which ends up, and I will not tell how, but ends up with a very telling photo of the face-to-face between these young people and the police.
All right, no spoilers from Richard Verly. Lila Jacinto.
Well, for my book, I've picked The Empress, which is... I'm escaping. I'm going into history, and the book is Empress by Ruby Lal. It is a book on Noor Jahan, who was married to the Mughal emperor. I picked this for two reasons. One is precious little is known about women in history. Two is the Mughals are, we're seeing with the right wing a rereading of history. So the Mughals are bad because in India right now, because the Hindu right wing sees everything Muslim as being fundamentally un-Indian. She was an incredibly powerful empress. She actually co-reigned with her husband. So she was not just the wife. She was a sovereign as his health failed. She is the stepmother of Shah Jahan, who made the Taj Mahal, and an incredible patron of the arts. And what we see in the Taj Mahal is really what Noor Jahan brought into the culture of the subcontinent. And for my film, although I didn't pick one, I'm going to pick The Insult, another nod to Lebanon, because The Insult is a story about how history, and history is my theme, and in Lebanese case, how the civil war, the wounds of the civil war is still playing out today. And, history, it just doesn't die.
Patrick Smith.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of a link there because my book would be William Dalrymple's book, The Anarchy, which is an incredible historical tale of the East India Company.
I support this.
And how when the British in Shakespeare's time formed the East India Company, Britain controlled 3% of the world's GDP. India controlled 25% of the world's GDP. After a century of the East India Company operating, Britain controlled over 30% of the world's GDP and India controlled under 10%. But to me, Dalrymple's historical research is absolutely superb. His narrative skills are brilliant, but it also tells us a lot about how multinational companies developed. It's a kind of template for the predatory multinational company. I would really suggest you get a copy, curl up with it over the holidays, and really
we'll be braced for these times of globalization. Patrick Smith, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Lila Jacinto, Richard Verly, Rim Momtaz. Thank you for being with us throughout the year, right here on France 24. Happy holidays to everyone.